Good morning, everyone. I'm Amy Farrington. I'm the Vice President of Public Policy and Small Business here at the Manatee Chamber. Thank you for joining us this morning. This is our latest in our Workforce Wellness webinar series presented with Centerstone. This has been sponsored by All Trust. So today's topic is managing PTSD issues among employees during challenging times and how to have those productive conversations. So now I would like to introduce Dr. Robert Boxley. He is the Director of Clinical Education for Centerstone's Psychiatry Residency and Doctoral Psychology programs. He's been involved with the training of the next generation of doctors since 2001 and has had over 200 doctors receive training under him. He's a licensed he's been a licensed psychologist for 20 years, and during that time he has worked with adults, children, and adolescents in a variety of behavioral health areas. He has a number of professional and research interests, including trauma, co-occurring disorders, positive psychology, and emotional dysregulation. He's presented on topics of workforce development, volunteer retention, and trauma recovery. So with that, I welcome you, Dr. Boxley, and I will turn the screen share over to you.
So welcome, everybody. We're going to be talking a bit today about the most extreme expression of trauma there can be, and that is like PTSD. I believe we have a presentation next week on trauma, which will be a more generalized view of the expression of kind of traumatic symptoms. But today it's going to be more about the more serious expressions of trauma, the most serious, which would be more PTSD related expressions of trauma. And particularly in light of all the things that have been going on the last few months. I'll go into a little bit about how trauma affects us, like how PTSD actually occurs, and the kinds of things one can do to mitigate it in a workforce. So hopefully you'll get something out of it and be able to use it with your employees going forward. In the end, I also have some ideas of some preventative things you could do and some immediate things you could do if an employee has a particularly difficult time. So I'll give you that too. So some things about PTSD is PTSD is commonly associated with all of these really extreme instances, right? Where, war and violence and torture and assaults of various kinds, all of these things are life-threatening, kind of unpredictable, uncontrollable events that could reach into our lives at any given time and cause us great bodily harm, awful things happening to us. And really for many of the cases that I've worked with PTSD, this is the source of their PTSD. Unfortunately, in the last few months, there have been some new sources of potential problem, and here they are. Doorknobs have become threats, and hugs, and handshakes, and talking to people, and your dentist, and office, and airplane, and restaurant have all now become, for some people, of similar ilk as these other situations. And so now all of these other things have the same patina of potential life-threatening, life-altering experience that those more extreme ones do. And because of the COVID-19 pandemic, there is some reality to this, just like there is some reality to kind of the war and torture and assault as well. There is some reality to this. And how people deal with it, though, is what we're going to talk about, because even in those more extreme situations of war and torture and assault, There are some folks that are resilient. There are some folks that that have mild trauma symptoms, moderate trauma symptoms, but then there are a small percentage that have true full-blown PTSD symptoms. And I want to show you a little bit how that happens. I hope this doesn't get too wonky. I'm really interested in kind of brain functions and stuff. So if it does, I apologize in advance, but hopefully my enthusiasm for the topic will hold the day through through kind of rather boring brain material, I'm hoping. So, so let me show you a little bit about like how you can get PTSD. So how we normally process things in the world is that we see something and we kind of notice whether it's something we like or something we don't like. And then we pick up the teddy bear and it's all nice and fuzzy. So we feel good about it. And that consequence of feeling good about it, we communicate to a part of our brain that sorts things into good and bad. For those of you that are fans of Harry Potter, it's kind of your brain sorting hat. It sorts things into good and bad. And then there's another part of our brain that's kind of the Google part of our brain that remembers whether these things have been good or bad in the past. It's like if a new thing comes up, you go to your hippocampus and says, so in the past, has this been good or bad? And hippocampus, just like Siri and Alexa, will tell you whether it's been good or bad in the past. And then that part of your brain communicates to your prefrontal cortex, which plans on whether you should try to get more teddy bears or avoid teddy bears, depending on whether teddy bears have been good in the past. Does that make sense? So it kind of flows from your brain kind of notices whether it's been good, it remembers it's good, and then it tries to get more good. It does the same thing with bad. Bad stuff happens, your amygdala sorts it into bad, your hippocampus remembers it's bad, and your prefrontal cortex wants to avoid it in the future. That's kind of our normal function right now. That's how our brains work all the time. Now, when something traumatic happens, another part of our brain really lights up, and it's the hypothalamus. That's your fight, flight, freeze part of your brain. It lights up. And it communicates a great deal with different parts of the brain. One part in particular, though, and this is where the PTSD comes in. So when something bad happens, like, say, COVID-19 pandemic, right? You get all the normal stuff. We've decided that that COVID-19 is bad, and our amygdala now knows it's bad, and our hippocampus remembers that it's bad, and our prefrontal cortex is saying, let's avoid it. Okay, good source of that. Good note to self. But our hypothalamus is really, really energized. And it starts putting this stuff called cortisol into our brains that particularly affects the hippocampus. And you can kind of imagine what might happen, but I'll show you. So over time, as bad gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and cortisol continues to flow pretty significantly from the hypothalamus, it actually shrinks the hippocampus. And I don't mean like shrinks in a metaphoric way. I mean, when you do brain scans, you actually see this part of the brain shrink. So cortisol kind of eats up that part of your brain. So what happens with PTSD is the Google part of your brain now has been shrunk. So
I'd say I'm more web smart than street smart.
And my Google Home just commented. But what you get is a Google that, okay, you get that part of your brain no longer functioning very well. I'm thinking, whereas before it would get a lot of information, now it's more like Ask Jeeves in terms of information. And so what you get is new things come in, they get sorted into good or bad, but your hippocampus can't remember whether they were good or bad. So it defaults to everything being bad or dangerous. So then your prefrontal cortex says, how can I avoid all of this dangerous stuff? So with PTSD, what has occurred is the portion of your brain that remembers that things were okay, that home environment you were at is actually safe, doesn't remember that anymore. And suddenly home is a risk, and relationships are a risk, and any conversation you have with somebody else could be a risk, because that the remembering part of your brain is impaired by all of that extra hypothalamus cortisol action. So that's how PTSD gets developed. And there's a certain formula for PTSD. Not that you want to do this to anybody, but I just want to tell you that should you ever want to do PTSD, this is how you do it. So you make sure that whatever happens is very severe. You make sure is of long duration, and you make sure that it's really, really close to the person. If you put those three things together, you are liable to get some PTSD. The more severe it is, the longer it happens, and the closer it is to you, the more likely it is you are to get PTSD from any given thing. Now there's some other qualifiers there too, like if you've also had really, really awful things happen in your childhood. We call them ACE events, but they're basically, things you would never want to happen to a child. If you have any of those and you have a mental health problem, you're much more likely to get PTSD too. Another formula on how to do that is you do the same formula there, but you also withdraw any kind of social support, and you can get PTSD. So these are the three ways that you can get PTSD. And if you think about kind of situation, severity is, one would say it's severe enough that many people have died from it. It's been going on for quite some time, and it's on your front doorknob. So that's pretty proximate to your situation, or it's in your office. So you can see why some of these formulas have resulted in some of our employees developing PTSD-like symptoms or full-blown PTSD. And if you add some of these other things where there's an already existing mental health concern, or like a history of traumas in their background, or very little social support, and that even makes it more likely that you'd see kind of a PTSD level of trauma reaction. So this is how PTSD happens. These are all the symptoms of PTSD. Now, but PTSD really falls into like three main categories, and that is kind of intrusiveness, anxiety, and avoidance of things. So that's the typical kind of presentation for PTSD. And if you think about it, it really is hitting all the various aspects of ourselves, kind of our feeling, thinking, doing portions of ourselves. It hits each one of those. And how it hits that is that with PTSD, you have really distorted and intrusive thinking. And you also have a level of arousal and anxiety that is way beyond the norm for the situation. And you also behave in a real avoidant manner. And I'll talk about each of these in particular, but But this is PTSD in a nutshell, is when you have full-blown PTSD, all of these things happen, and they happen in the extreme. Because PTSD is the most extreme trauma reaction there is. So when you're dealing with someone who might have PTSD, their thinking is likely to be distorted. They're likely to have difficulty concentrating, frequent thoughts that they're going to die or be threatened, some memory impairment, some poor problem solving. Interestingly, though, I mean, if you look at some of these qualifications, it's also thinking things are out of control and thinking that your employer is contributing to that out of controlness or isn't contributing to having things be in control. So that can potentiate an already distorted view of how threatening things are. And I'll get to that later about how to calm that down a little bit, but I do want to point out that the distortions here are not accurate and they are intrusive. So they will happen even when the person is safe at home. They will happen when they're safe at their desks. They happen at any time whatsoever and are very, very immobilizing. So when you have these really strong thoughts of death or threat or whatever that enter your head, it's really hard to do anything else. So that's the thinking part of PTSD, the distortions and the intrusive thoughts that kind of come into things. And it's not just your conscious life. A lot of these intrusive thoughts enter your dream life as well. So dreams become particularly fraught with all kinds of threats and all kinds of concerns and those kind of things. So you aren't even relieved of this necessarily when you're unconscious. Sleep deprivation is one aspect of PTSD for that very reason. But anyway, so that's the distortions and the intrusive thinking that PTSD brings to bear for folks. And the thinking part of your brain goes to kind of our risk assessment system. And I won't go into this because people are already like, but our risk assessment, we have a great way to analyze risk. I would say that's, our top 10 things that human beings do really well is risk analysis. And there are various different parts of the brain that do different functions with risk analysis, from figuring out how bad the risk is to remembering what it is and making decisions about what to do going forward. Well, some of the things with our current dilemma and the risk assessment system are causing some extra grief in that thinking part of the PTSD model. So a typical kind of risk assessment approach would be kind of looking at how likely something bad is to happen and how bad it will be when it does happen, right? So I know those sound like the same thing, but they really aren't. One is like, will it happen? And one is, how bad will it be? And for instance, with H3N2 or H1N1, the common flu, all right, with those kind of viruses, you get about 11% of the population at any given time, any given year. It varies from 15 to 20%, but on average, about 11% get the flu every year, okay? And in terms of like the potential severity, about 0.2% wind up in the hospital and 0.02% die each year from the flu. So if the thinking part of your brain is trying to analyze risk of the flu, it very much is interested in these numbers because it goes to whether it's a Likely, unlikely, if your risk is low or very low or moderate or high, it looks at all of these things. We also have some modifiers to the flu too. We know that these are high risk factors, that if you are 65 or older, if you're younger than 2, if you're peripartum, if you're an indigenous person, if you're in a nursing home or SNF, if you have serious medical conditions, and we know exactly which ones are particularly prone to like having problems with the flu, that your risk goes up. Like, we know this. So your thinking part of your brain can analyze that risk and act accordingly. So let me talk a little bit about COVID-19. So this is what we know about COVID-19. We know that we don't know how many have it, we don't know how bad it is, and we don't know who's going to die from it. But we do know that there are two classes of people that have to worry about it. People who have symptoms and people who do not have symptoms. That's what we got. So in terms of like having our great risk assessment system that we have in our brain kind of work to our advantage at this point, it is not going to be helpful until some of these things have been filled in. Now, I do have to say that it's been a short period of time, and some of these things have been filled in. In the little blue box, we now know that there are some classes of people with diabetes, people of a certain age, that are at increased risk. So we're starting to get the blue box filled in with who's at extra risk. But the percentages are still a work in progress. And those are very important to our risk assessment system, because we have to sort ourselves into whether things are risky and things are not. I bring this up in the context of talking about PTSD, in that one of the ways you help a person with the thinking part of PTSD is you give them a few facts about how risky things really are. And if your employee is particularly worried about COVID-19, your facts are going to be, may not hold the day at this point, the way that we would like them to hold the day. So I just have to share with you that one of the main fixes for the thinking part of PTSD may be somewhat unavailable to us presently, because we don't have all the facts. So let me jump to the feeling part. The feeling part of PTSD is what you hear a lot about. A lot of anger and irritability and just emotional dysregulation across the board. People are very fearful all the time. They're hypervigilant, and that's one of the major features of a true PTSD reaction, is that hypervigilance. And when I say hypervigilant, I mean beyond the norm, even by current standards. Currently, there are a lot of protective measures that we're all taking during the pandemic that are kind of reasonable and kind of well thought out and encouraged by the WHO and the CDC. Some people are taking much more extreme measures, and some of those measures may fall in the hypervigilant realm. Just want to throw out there, so the hypervigilance in the pandemic, actually this is a great time to have a fair amount of obsessiveness with regard to hygiene and other things, but being hypervigilant means that you're never safe. Like, even in your house, you're not safe. Even when you've done everything, you're not safe. There is no safe haven for you. And so I want to show you what happens to the brain when there's no safe haven for it. So a normal brain kind of um, is, it lights up when it's being used and it turns itself off when it's not. So this is kind of a normal brain function right here. And this is a brain with their eyes open because the visual cortex is lit up. So you can kind of see that the back of the brain is lit up. So this is a brain scan of someone with their eyes open. But you can kind of see there's a lot of blue, and so their eyes are open, but they aren't thinking about much at this point. Okay, this is what a brain on PTSD looks like. The brain is aroused way beyond what it should be. There are too many lights on. My father-in-law worked for the power company, and he felt very strongly when you left a room, you turned off a light. Well, that's the way our brains work. When it's no longer needed, you turn off a light. And for the very reason my father-in-law was like, turn off a light, didn't want a big power bill, the brain cannot support this level of lights on for any given length of time, okay? Because the brain is designed to be like on the left, lights on, lights off. For people with PTSD, they are aroused like this sometimes for years. So their brains are on like this all the time. And there are consequences to having brains on all the time like this. And some of those consequences are that hypervigilance and that anxiety, and at a certain level, you start to not so much burn out portions of your brain, but use up some of the neurotransmitters that have your brain work. And so you can start to be moody and depressed and other things, because all the energy being expended to evaluate threats in the environment and being ready for the next bad thing to happen are sapping your ability to kind of enjoy yourself and enjoy life. So this level of brain energization, that's a tough word, really is not healthy. But that's what you get with someone with PTSD. You get a very, very energized brain. And also, all of this affects behavior. And just like it's almost a normal threat response. So far what we've got is we've got a brain that thinks there's threats in the environment everywhere. And some of the decision-making processes that would help them figure out that that's the case are not available. And you've got an overactive brain that is hyped up for, that is just generally aroused and could go in the worrying depressive realm really well, could go to the anger, acting out, irritability really well. All of those are arousal kind of things, right? Well, it is perfectly reasonable under those circumstances one way to kind of cope with all of that is to just avoid everything. So what you get with people with PTSD is they start to not do all kinds of things that they used to do. Things they used to enjoy, things that used to give them some kind of meaning in life, they stop doing. At least in the workforce, you'd see people start to call in sick that never called in sick before, or quit, or refuse to do certain things, or outside the workforce, you might also see a lot more drug use and a lot more just oversleeping or impaired sleeping. Or you occasionally see an increase in like risky behaviors with people that normally would never do that before, because what you've got is kind of an overactive, kind of an aroused brain that also has a bunch of distorted thinking going on. So when you have those two in concert, the behaviors could be all over the place. And certainly sometimes you have, you might have people say, I can't do that, I won't do that, I'll just quit. You know, this is not worth my life. And I think we're hearing more and more, you know, as we transition between different levels of quarantine and other things, a lot of concern about making those transitions and similar things that people might say during that period of time. So this is PTSD. Now, I do have to say that the vast majority of people in the world do not have PTSD. The vast majority of your employees or your coworkers do not have PTSD. This is the most extreme manifestation of trauma. However, it is not uncommon for maybe all of us to have a little bit of some of this. So I just want to put it out there that extreme cases, but some of these things may be happening to any one of us to a small degree, and that is not necessarily a problem. You know, that's what our coping skills take care of. So just to be clear, this is the most extreme version of it. Now, how you get over it, how one gets over PTSD is with, instead of distorted thinking, accurate thinking. You know, instead of out of control arousal, manageable feelings. And instead of like impulsive, reactive, avoidant actions, thoughtful actions. This is like what we, like when we're treating someone for PTSD, this is what we try to get them to. Now, I do have to say that getting them from here to here can take months and years of work with lots of different modalities in play, both kind of socially, biochemically, maybe with some psychiatric medications, as well as with therapy and support from friends, family, and employers. Okay, so it is not a quick fix, and it is not something that really any employer could fix all by themselves. That would be impossible. So getting them to move between those two pieces can take can take a village to move some folks with full-blown PTSD from there to being in recovery like this. So I do want to encourage you, though, that because it takes a village, if you do have somebody that you think has that full-blown PTSD manifestation, please start referring them to the various village members, like psychiatrists and therapists and whatever, that can help them with their particular thing, because there's no way any of us alone could really help move a person from having full-blown PTSD to this situation where their thinking is right, their feelings are right, and their actions are right. Does that make sense? Let's see. But there are a few things you can do. The research, and there are some things that employers can do to affect both the thinking, feeling, and behaving of folks who might be prone or trending towards PTSD. I'm going to go over the 4 things you can do. I think there are 4. Yeah. So the number one thing is for the thinking part of the thinking part of your brain loves order, and it loves process, and it loves ABC, 1, 2, 3. It loves policies and procedures. I know that's hard to imagine, but there's a portion of your brain, it's the prefrontal cortex, that just loves that stuff. That's the thinking part of your brain. And if like one intervention that you could very much use is coming up with a very detailed response plan and sharing it with each one of your vulnerable, or actually all of your employees. And the response plan should delineate who's going to do what when, and in what order, and in what steps, and who's the point person and who's the backup person, and we're going to roll this out in 5 different sections. Okay, you heard a lot of numbers there, didn't you? Well, the prefrontal cortex, that thinking part of the brain, that if you've got PTSD and it's all distorted, really loves numbers and loves order and loves 5 steps to this. And if you have a response plan, if you have a response plan to COVID-19, if you have a response plan to how we're going to open, if you have a response plan to what happens if a customer comes in and coughs, if you have a response plan to how to approach somebody that tested positive for COVID-19, if you have a response plan for, so you get the gist. You know, these plans start to calm that thinking part of the brain, because remember, one of the aspects of the thinking distortions is that things are out of control and my employer doesn't know how to get them into control, right? That's one of the thought distortions that someone with PTSD has. Well, really detailed response plans are a counterpunch to that way of thinking, because the same part of the brain, the thinking part of the brain that loves numbers and order and all that stuff, on one hand, is feeling like it's not there, but now it's getting all of these decision trees, and it's getting all of these steps, and it's getting, if this happens, I need to do these 5 things, and if that happens, I need to do these 4 things. And all of that can start to eat away at some of the distorted thinking that comes with the thinking distortions with PTSD, because all of that is just so compelling for that part of the brain, that people are in control, that people do know what is coming next, and there is a procedure to follow for this thing or that thing. There is order in the universe, right? And all of that communicates, you know what? Maybe I am safe, because their distortions are saying they are not safe. And because our risk assessment system right now is not going to be able to hold the day, we have to give everybody another way to feel safe. And having detailed response plan things is a way to have people feel safe, is they know what's going to come next. So that is thing 1 about how to probably mitigate the thinking part of PTSD for employees, is a detailed response plans that are well communicated. Like if you come up with a detailed response plan and put it in a drawer, that's not going to do you any good at all. You've got to come up with this thing and communicate it widely so that everybody appreciates how orderly and thought out and how safe things are. So that's thing 1 for thinking. For the feeling part of things, people are going to have difficult emotions. There are going to be times when people are going to be overwhelmed. They're already overwhelmed now, and they're on their couches. So in work situations, particularly if they haven't been in work situations for a while, there's going to need to be some kind of transition, really, for folks. And there's going to be some understanding that emotions are going to be more variable now than maybe ever before. Like you may have a work situation where there's never been an employee crying, or there's never been an employee that has to leave suddenly, or that kind of strong emotional reaction. Okay, that ship sailed. So in the coming months, you are going to have employees be much more emotionally reactive than they ever have before. And that's not a problem. It makes us human, right? Our emotions are one of the things that make us human, and we really like emotions. Uh, it's just because of all the things that have gone on with the pandemic, we are going to have a lot more uncomfortable emotional uh, expressions, both in the workplace and at home. The thing is, that's totally okay. Like, we can handle it. We've had these same emotional reactions. It's, these are not foreign things to any of us. They might be foreign to the workplace, but they are not foreign things to us. And what I want to encourage folks both to tolerate a little more variety in emotional expression, both in the workplace and with your loved ones during this period of time. And with a fair amount of empathy, because we are all in a very difficult situation. And for some folks, the first time in their lifetimes in a situation like this. Some other things you can do is there are tried and true stress reduction things that work. It is really impossible to sustain a certain level of upset and breathe deeply for a period of time too. Give it a try. It's really hard to cry a lot and also do deep breathing. There's something about breathing, deep breathing, not shallow breathing, but deep breathing that calms us all, that is a great kind of go-to stress reduction strategy. And that can happen in the break room, that can happen, outside walking around the building, that can happen in your car. You can breathe anywhere. Actually, I hope you do, because breathing is like important. But deep breathing is an excellent go-to way to like manage emotions in the short term. It also helps to have safe spaces. So if an employee is having a particularly difficult time, having a safe space to be able to manage that would be really important. Behavior, to modify the behavior of folks that might have PTSD, the tried and true way is to gradually expose them to whatever is causing them anxiety. So, because avoidance is not a good long-term strategy, it's a great short-term one, but not a long-term one. And one way you can do this is to verbally walk a person through what their day might be like now, what the office might like be now, what the workplace might like be now. You verbally walk them through that. And then you might walk them through it in real time and make sure that they are acutely aware that there is a safety net, that there is a disaster button that they can press if somebody comes in and coughs all over something or other. They know exactly what to do because you've got a response plan. So that gradual exposure back to the workplace or to the workplace as it exists now also mitigates some of that avoidance, because now it's like instead of asking for, okay, you're going from the couch to in the office full time without even knowing what's going on in the office, you are gradually approximating them getting there. And you're much more likely to get people without trauma reactions if you take that gradual approach to reintroducing them to things. And finally, the law of the land for all of us, but really if you're dealing with employees, is to be as safe as life allows at this point. And it is crucial to be talking to your coworkers and your employees, and be real, okay? This is not a time to sugarcoat things. If you sugarcoat things, people will know. And they figure if you're lying about that, if you're sugarcoating that, what are you sugarcoating over? And that could be really bad. And really, like, sugarcoating things actually makes that thinking part of PTSD even worse, because it's seen, oh, they're lying to me. Now I don't know what's real or not. And so that thinking part of your PTSD lights up a great deal when someone tries to pretend like things are better than they are. So don't be Pollyannish about what the risks are, about what the challenges are going into any kind of change back from like quarantine or whatever. Be real, because, and even though that's difficult, real is better than sugarcoated. Be real with them about what you're doing for safety. Be real about the fact that we know that we're all stressed out. Be real that you know, the whatever organization you're with has taken measures, and that these are the measures, and oh, here's my response plan. So everything is all set out. Just be real with that. Don't try to make it better than it is. Don't try to make it worse than it is. Just try to make it as it is. People will appreciate it. Finally, make sure that everybody knows that you customize this. People hate, like if you download a pandemic toolkit from some organization somewhere and try to implement the pandemic toolkit in your organization, people are going to say, well, it doesn't apply to us, or this doesn't apply to us, or that doesn't apply to us. And with each one of those things, people start to think, well, then maybe this whole thing doesn't apply to us. And OMG, we're back to being fearful and threatened and whatever. So make sure you customize whatever approach you do, and make sure you get your employees to help you customize it, because they know what doorknobs need to be sanitized most frequently. That might not be something that upper management knows about, but your employees know which door gets touched the most. You got to ask them. You got to involve them in this process, which means you got to communicate a lot with your employees at this point, maybe more so than you ever have before, and on a very, very human, in a very human way, that you are, you understand where things are, and you want whatever feedback you can get from them. My time's about out, but finally, okay. So general interventions for your entire workforce is when you are looking at reopening an office or reinitiating a program or doing something new that you haven't done before. Following these steps hopefully will make sure that it mitigates some more severe PTSD reactions. So this would be what the meeting would be like. So you sit down with all of your workforce, as many as you can, and you ask them kind of generally like what happened, where are they at generally. Then you ask them the thinking question. So what has been the main thing that you all have been thinking about during this period of time? And then you ask them the feeling question. So what has been the worst about this personally for you? And you don't really force them to answer that one, but you throw it out there because you're wanting to know, like, personally, what has been the worst about this period of time? And then you hit them with, okay, so what have been the consequences of all of these things to all of this stuff? And you don't have to fix it. You do not have to come up with solutions or whatever, but having an initial meeting with your entire workforce to generally ask these kind of questions and sit and listen is a good way to kind of show that that there's a sensitivity, and it should calm down these various parts of the brain, because the thinking part of your brain is going to say, okay, they wanted to know what I think. The feeling part is going to feel heard, and the behavior part is going to feel like, okay, they get all my bells and whistles. So it would be a good initial meeting to have. You are going to have some employees that are going to have problems. And when you have a worker that has an immediate problem that looks like PTSD related stuff, the immediate thing you should do is get them to a quiet and less stimulating place, dictate a 15-minute break at the very least, okay? Give them something to drink, because fluids are good. Don't have them rush back to work. And all of this is in service of allowing them to get their thinking back on track. Because sometimes when there is an immediate crisis, the distorted thinking has kicked in, and that has triggered kind of a crisis of some kind. And they need to have time to get their thinking back on track, and they need to get time to get their feeling back on track. And the one thing you can do to help them with that is just to sit and talk to them about how they're feeling. Critical, do not talk about the facts. When you're talking to someone about their feeling, the facts do not matter. No one cares about the facts. No one cares that, this person who was really, really anxious about returning to work and saw someone across the street cough, is now having a panic attack because they're afraid that COVID has crossed the street, gone under the door, and entered the office, and they're potentially at risk of it, okay? Do not talk about the facts about how impossible that is. That is a waste of time when you have an employee like this. What you need to do is you just need to talk to them about their feelings, how they're doing, what's going on inside, how they're feeling. Do not hit them with facts at that point, all right? But do hit them with the idea that they probably need to do some deep breathing and whatever they can do to calm themselves, particularly the breathing thing. That would be something you could offer. And hopefully, given, in this immediate situation, a person can maybe return to be on task more swiftly than they would otherwise. Because what can happen with a worker that has an immediate reaction like this is they can go into fight, flight, or freeze mode and basically leave for the day or something like that, rather than they got a safe place, they're calm, they're breathing, they're thinking how unlikely it is finally, and they're able to kind of get back to some semblance of normal. So that's an immediate intervention that you can do with anybody that's having an immediate concern, and a more general thing that you could do across the workforce. And I think that's it for me, but I suspect I have some questions and some other things going forward. Please do not ignore that that there's major stuff going on. Don't wait. Don't tell people not to talk to each other, and don't lack a response plan. That response plan thing will calm a lot, will kind of solve a lot of issues. So now I think I'm open for questions.
One question, and I think you just actually put the slide up that might help with this. One question that I got is, many of our small businesses are doing it all, right? And so they don't have a professional HR, they don't have internal resources for these kinds of things. And one of the reasons that we wanted to put this series together, I think, was so that the experts from Centerstone could kind of highlight signs so that employers can see things that are happening and at least be able to say, okay, this could be a problem. So if somebody sees somebody that's showing some of these signs and they can't really handle it internally or don't feel comfortable or whatever. What do you suggest they do? How do they reach out to get additional resources?
Well, kind of like I was saying that no one of us could like manage this all by themselves, and I'm including Centerstone, or I'm including like a therapist or whatever. Is no one person can like get a person through through like what potentially is PTSD. Um, you really need kind of family buy-in, employer buy-in. You need some medical help as well. So you need a whole lot of people. So I think I think what I want to say is at the front end is know that it is impossible for you as an employer to manage this all by yourself. Is you've got to call in the troops, and the troops involve if they've got an EAP program, for sure, like do an EAP, but most small businesses don't. But probably immediately, doctor, therapist, and involvement immediately, right? Because that's going to be the only way that that things get any better, is by calling in some of those initial troops. And what I often say is, you have to look who's available on one's insurance plan, or those kind of things for what kind of healthcare provider can provide care. But that would be the initial thing, is, kind of get thee to a doctor to help with these things. As an employer, as an employer now, they can say, I've been through this training with Dr. Boxley. I kind of know what to do here. But one of the things that he told me to do was get thee to a doctor if you got, particularly symptomatic. And I would say that is what they should do, is get them to a doctor, a psychologist, a therapist, pretty quickly if they get this severe level of PTSD.
And maybe that's a good thought now, is to start looking at those resources so that you have them available should one of your employees start showing some signs. So I have one question up here. How can you tell the difference between PTSD and overthinking or making it bigger than it is?
By how bad it is. Okay, because I have to say that, like, we all kind of can be guilty of overthinking things. We can all be guilty of thinking things are worse than they are, and conversely, we occasionally think things are better than they are, right? So these are just kind of I guess cognitive. This is the human condition. We're always trying to figure this out. Where the big difference between like just overthinking it and distorted thinking is the intensity with which it happens. It's one thing to not be sure, not be sure whether you should go to a place that because you aren't sure you can do appropriate social distancing, right? And you're thinking, I'm really not sure about that. Okay, and the person may spend hours thinking, well, okay, is 4 feet okay? Because I think they're 4 feet apart, and that kind of overthinking stuff almost can be in the realm of normal at the present time. Where it goes into like clinically relevant is when it debilitates you. Okay, so when you're overthinking and the overthinking is distorted, like it's kind of not based in reality in some ways. It's kind of overthought to the extent that it is also distorted too, and it results in major life impairments. Okay, so when we're talking about, like with PTSD, the thinking is distorted, the thoughts they're intrusive thoughts, and it significantly affects your life. Like unable to work, unable to get out of bed, unable to like function. So that is one measuring stick of like overthinking is one thing, but overthinking to Overthinking with the distorted thinking that comes with it is another entirely. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's really about like how bad the effects are and how distorted the thinking is. Rather than the, so it's not really a quantity thing, because you can overthink is kind of like thinking too much, whereas with PTSD it's thinking too much in a distorted way, and then not being able to function because of it.
That's good information. Thank you. So I don't see any more questions at this time. I think we've covered a lot of territory. Very interesting. Thank you.